Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and what I've got here in front of me is a bin that I had set up for worms 48 days ago. And you know, tomorrow 49 days would make it 7 weeks since I had set up this bin. And it's actually been coming in pretty handy because even though there's no worms in here, it's sort of become my supply of on-demand bedding. On a couple occasions I've actually tapped into here to use it to grab some bedding that I thought would be useful in a pinch when I wasn't really prepared. Kind of an impromptu need for some bedding that was not totally sterile, some stuff that was kind of sitting already for some time and somewhat impregnated already with some of the beneficial microbes and bacteria and stuff that is needed in a worm bin. So what I'm doing here is actually tapping into this to grab some of the material that's in here, to preserve it in this little container that I'm going to set aside because the day has come to finally put this bin to use as is. And I'll at least have a little sample of what was in there already for a little side project I'm thinking of. But today, this container finally gets launched with a new population of worms. So now that I've sort of set the stage for that and I'm ready to go in terms of putting something in here, let me show you what I'm doing today. I've got a USPS package here, and as you can see it says live worms on it, and this is shipped to me on Monday and it arrived yesterday, Wednesday. It took 2 days to get here, and it's from Northeast Worms. Northeast Worms, fairly new operation, and I've seen a few of their videos, people receiving worms from these guys, huge worms. And something that I've really been interested in doing recently is somehow obtaining some good African nightcrawlers, some nice big fat ones, that I can really feel confident in knowing that they are African nightcrawlers. Because if you've been out here on my channel, you'll know that I've got a bin over here. It's actually the one that's right there on the top of the top shelf on the right there. It's labeled as African nightcrawlers, and it probably is nightcrawlers, but they're such small worms and their color just somehow doesn't really jive with what most people expect to see when they see an African nightcrawler. But I get a lot of criticism on that. People saying, you know, what you got there is not African nightcrawlers, but this is coming from a reputable worm dealer, and I've seen the worms. They're definitely African nightcrawlers, and we're going to give these guys a new home today. So we're going to go ahead and get this box open. Let me set some of this stuff aside here. I'm going to cover it back up the way I had it, keep all the moisture in, and set it aside just so we can get in a little bit closer and check out what we've got going on here. Just want to bring the camera in a little bit closer so we can see. And I've got a knife here that we can open up the package with. So you can see what we got. Now, I've seen a few of these unboxings, so I sort of know what to expect because I've seen I've seen what the normal packaging of these consists of. So there is sort of a little welcome packet here. Guess we could check it out and see what it says. I guess since there is a certain amount of moisture in here, luckily the glue on the envelope opens up quite easily. So what we've got here is, forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it properly, but it's a Gaetano's business card here for Northeast Worms, as well as a few stickers, which is kind of cool. A couple little souvenir items to go along with the product, and you can see it's in sort of like a kind of a woven bag. I would assume that it's some sort of a breathable kind of material, perhaps Tyvek or something like that. And it's tied off pretty securely, it would seem. Let's see what it takes to get into this thing. Now my package was sent on Monday, and the U.S. Post Office's tracking of this package was not as good as it could have been. Because in the past I've seen tracking information entered pretty regularly, but up until just maybe an hour or two before this thing arrived on my doorstep, the tracking still said in transit, and the last location for this was still New York, where it originated from. And there was even special instructions written on the box. I'm not sure if you noticed it when we first started opening up the box, but as you can see, what it says here on the box is that the instructions provided were to hold it at the post office, and I'd given Northeast Worms my phone number, and he'd written the phone number onto the package here as well. I've just removed my personal information here to protect it. And the whole idea there was that the post office would not place this box of worms in their truck or let it sit out there on a hot day all day while it's getting delivered. The idea was that it would stay in the nice cool post office up until I'd been notified that it's time to come fetch them, and that I would go pick them up personally. But just a little deviation from what was in the game plan is that basically they dropped it off on my doorstep, so it did arrive a little bit unexpected. Not only that, but their tracking information did actually say that the estimated time of arrival for it was not Wednesday, 2 days after it was delivered, but rather I think it had actually said that it was supposed to arrive today, Thursday, or maybe even Friday. So the information was a little bit all over the place, and then the instructions were not followed properly. So to a certain degree, shame on the post office for not doing what they were asked to do. But let's continue with the unboxing here, because I did sort of probe down through this packaging material, a whole bunch of nice shredded cardboard that we could use as bedding. And I also noticed one other thing down under here. Protected from the dampness of the bag of worms is this plastic bag in which there's a nice t-shirt. Very, very cool. 2XL. I guess, you know, maybe he's seen my videos. He could tell that I'm a larger size person. But he didn't ask what size shirt I wanted. In fact, I didn't even really know that there was a shirt coming. I mean, in a way, I did suspect there might be a shirt coming, because I did see on some other people's videos where they open up the package that was sent to them by Northeast Worms, and they did show that they'd received t-shirts as well, so that's pretty cool. I'm definitely into t-shirts, so thank you for that, Gaetano. And I think now it's time to start looking at what's going on in here. We're not going to go too crazy, because I just want to peek down into the bag to see what we could see, but I think the actual reveal is going to be when we release these little guys into their new home. So it's some sort of a maybe peat moss or maybe coco coir or some sort of a nice medium that the worms are probably nice and comfortable in. And I was informed that I was sent not only worms, but there's also a whole bunch of babies as well as cocoons included in this. So the population might start out appearing a little bit small in the beginning, but based on that, its size should grow over time. So I'm not sure what else there is to do in terms of unboxing and showing the quality of the packaging and the packaging materials. And even just commenting a little bit on the delivery, which obviously the vendor has little or no control over. You got to admit, he certainly tried his best to, you know, arrange things so that the worms are handled as carefully as possible by labeling the packaging, showing that it's got live worms, and trying to instruct the courier to, you know, call for me to go pick them up when it gets on, you know, on site. But whatever, there's little or no control over that at some point. So I guess we're going to get the bin out here so we could start prepping the new home for these little guys. So let's bring this bus box back over. The one other thing that I had wanted to do here before placing the worms in was add a little bit of food, because when I built this bin almost 7 weeks ago, I'm fairly sure that I had placed in some food items, and those food items have probably long since broken down and turned into just mush or fluid or little scraps of food in here. So I had a couple days worth of coffee sitting upstairs in this little collection tray that I thought I would include as sort of that built-in feeding that I typically register in my tracking of my new bins. So I usually launch a new bin with the assumption that the first feeding that the worms are getting is one that's already been placed into the bin. And even though there was a kind of a feeding incorporated into the original build of this bin all those weeks ago, I thought that there'd be no harm in putting some nice bite-sized food in here for them to be able to nibble on. So I wanted to dump this stuff in here before we get going. And I guess along with that, we're just going to give them the coffee filters as well. And over here on the side, I've also got my grit. In my case, I use this pulverized eggshell as grit. So I also wanted to beef up the grit supply in here, because frankly, I really don't even remember at this point if grit was actually part of what I had placed in here when I built the bin originally. So we're just going to make sure that the cocoons, once they hatch, and the baby worms that were sent, as well as the adult worms too, they need it equally as well as the babies. We're going to make sure that there's a supply of grit in here to get the bin off to a good start. So let's get things kind of leveled off here so we can proceed to the release of the worms into their new home. All right. So there's not a whole lot to it, right? It's just a matter of pouring out the worms and checking out what we got. Now, sometimes I'll turn the camera over to time-lapse mode so that we can kind of observe the worms as they all squirm out of view down into the bedding. But usually I'm releasing a big pile of worms that's not kind of piled into a huge amount of bedding material. So it's really easy to see the worms. In this case, seeing the worms might not quite be so easy, because they are kind of all jumbled together within this peat moss or this coco coir or whatever this stuff is. So maybe we'll just kind of spread the stuff out here so we can try to get a view of what we've got. Here and there we could see a couple of them, and these babies are big, that's for sure. A much larger worm than I'm accustomed to. And you know, once upon a time I was sent cocoons for African nightcrawlers. I received them from the crazy worm lady back in the day when she was into the retailing of composting worms and running a YouTube channel talking about worm composting, but that was years ago. And you know, I ran that first bin of African nightcrawlers as a time lapse to watch the cocoons emerge and the babies get born and grow over time. And then I extracted that chamber of the time-lapse container and always kept the African nightcrawlers separate from the rest of the worms and isolated them from the rest of the worms so that they could be kept separate as a separate breed, a different type of worm. And I still keep them separate, as I showed you earlier, in their own tray on the shelf. I mean, in fact, they were actually running in 2 separate trays, and I had consolidated them into a single tray most recently, but I believe I'll be breaking that population into 2 separate containers once again. So we did actually find a little jumble of worms hanging out together. I wonder if we might actually be able to locate another one like that if we probe around a little bit. Maybe I just got lucky. Oh, do we have more here? Well, maybe not. So I got a feeling that the worms are going to definitely appreciate the nice dampness of the material that's down within the bin. Not to mention the fact that the material has been aging and priming for them for quite some time now, close to 7 weeks. So I think that they're going to enjoy their new home. And you know, all that nice shredded cardboard that came with this, that's in that box, I'm going to hang on to that and we'll just use it in the future feeding as extra bedding. But for now I kind of like this material here on top as our top cover for this release. So I think somebody mentioned recently that African nightcrawlers just don't seem to react to overhead light quite the way other worms do. So these worms are generally not as fazed by bright lights shining down on them. So they may or may not retreat down into the bedding quite as quickly as other worms do. So maybe they'll kind of hang out here on the surface for a little while and squirm around and whatnot. So I'm almost wondering if it would be interesting to see if I could just spread them around a little bit and maybe shoot a little bit of time lapse just so we could see what we could see. Maybe it'll reveal a little bit more in terms of how many worms there are over here just from their squirming and movement. So yeah, let's do a little bit of that. Alright, so I've allowed this to go for about 20 minutes. And some of these worms, like one of the ones over here, just seems like he's going back and forth and dancing around on the surface. Other ones, I thought there was a couple of them over here that seemed like they were pretty much dormant for a while, and then they finally started moving just a minute or two ago. And then there's other ones over here, like this one over here, maybe this one over here, I'm not sure. There were a couple that made me wonder if they're okay. So I thought that one other thing we could try before we close up shop here was to get my squirt bottle out here and gradually start wetting the top of the surface of the material here to give these guys a little bit of hydration. Maybe that's all they need, just to get a little bit active again. And then maybe we'll see more of them start to move around and start to dive down into the bed. So I'm going to try that, but I'm going to apply the moisture gradually as I resume the time lapse, and let's see what happens with that. Well, that was kind of interesting. I did, on one occasion, need to catch one of these little guys who'd gone over the edge, and he was kind of probing his head around, trying to find something to grab onto. And then he lost grip with his tail, and he did fall in my hand, so I threw him back into the bin. You might have noticed him just suddenly appear over somewhere around here. But on a couple other occasions, I did notice how, you know, one of the worms that had gotten most of its body over the edge and was kind of probing around and looking for where to go, realized that there was nowhere to go. He was just dangling, you know, maybe 3/4 of his body out in air, and then gradually started to like probe up back by his tail and find the ledge again and crawl back up to safety and not let himself drop off the edge. So I think in most cases they know enough not to just hurl themselves off the cliff, so to speak. But, you know, maybe not in every case, or at least you could see they're trying. Maybe the one that I ended up catching and needing to throw in was just an accident. But man, you could see the length of some of these worms. There's even a little tiny baby up here on the edge. So now I do feel compelled to come in here with a paper towel and dry off the walls of this container. Most of the worms have kind of retreated back down into the bed. There's a few over here on the wall. But it is almost irresistible for them to come up onto the walls of the container. The moment that I started spraying water up onto the edges of the container, and it wasn't my intention to get the sides of the bin all wet. It was just kind of overspray while I was attempting to moisten the bed, the top surface of the bed, but they could sense that there was moisture there, and as soon as they got a little sip of it, they just started roaming right up onto the walls and enjoying it. And you know, you can't blame the little guys. They've been in this relatively dry medium for quite some time, so a little dampness was probably a pretty big treat for them. I just had hoped that they would sort of sense the dampness down low within the bed and head there. But that didn't really happen, and I think this was also a pretty clear demonstration of the fact that these little guys really are not put off very much by the bright lights overhead. So they're pretty comfortable just hanging out on the surface and roaming around regardless of how bright the lights are overhead. So I was just anxious to get the sides of the bin nice and dry again so that they're not tempted to roam around out here where it's dangerous for them to be. And there were a couple that just did not seem to react at all, so I am a little concerned about them. I don't know, I'm sure some of them might not have survived the trip. Some of them, who knows, maybe they're just totally relaxing and not fazed by the fact that they were just emptied out of a bag into a bin, had a bunch of water sprayed onto them. So I'm actually handling the ones that were of concern to me, the ones that just seemed to lie there without moving. And you know, I guess there is always that possibility that some of them didn't make it, which is unfortunate. This guy might be one of them. All the other ones, though, that I was suspicious of, that I was concerned about, did seem to react once I actually touched them. But I did actually try aiming the spray bottle at some of them to see if I can dampen them, to see if that would get a rise out of them. And it didn't seem to faze them too much, and they just remained there, stationary. But for the most part, all the ones that I thought might be in peril or not doing so good because they didn't react or move did seem to get moving again after I gave them a little nudge. And you know, I don't know why, but they keep climbing the walls. And I don't have tops, you know, my containers are all open to the air. So I don't know, we'll see what happens, you know. I'm hoping that they don't start climbing out and finding that they're, you know, finding that they're getting into trouble. I did kind of have an idea that maybe I could repel them from the very top edge of the bin with something. And I thought that that something might be a little bit of salt. Because, you know, salt absorbs moisture, and I think worms, you know, you touch a worm with a little bit of salt and he's going to pull away quickly because he's going to feel that salt, you know, in real time, sucking the moisture out of his body or away from his body. I think that's the case. I've never really tried to do that. I've never really wanted to subject a worm to that sort of torture, because that does seem a little torturous. But I did sort of think that maybe if I were to line the top surface with a little bit of salty water the water would evaporate and then the salt would remain there, and that might end up being enough of a repellent to keep the worms down in the bin. So that's just something I'm going to give a try. Just something that occurred to me now, but I don't know if it's going to even work or not, but we'll see, I guess. But for now, I think I'm going to go ahead and cover this bin up in the traditional way. Maybe I'll come back with my little salt idea and do a treatment of the upper rim and maybe even the side walls with a little bit of salty water to see if that potentially helps keep the worms in place and in their new home, at least up until the point in time where they feel comfortable just staying put. So now, just one little piece of business that I want to take care of, which some of you might already be anticipating, because it's tradition around here in my wormery to always create a label for one of my new bins when it's being commissioned. And I am so glad that it arrived in time for me not to have to do it tomorrow, because tomorrow is the 13th and it's Friday. Oops. So my hope was not to launch the bin on Friday the 13th. So I am kind of glad that it is the 12th today of August. But we always created a new label for each of my worm bins. And if there's nothing written there, then it's usually presumed that they're red wigglers, but I usually label them if they're something other than red wigglers. So in this case, they're getting the traditional ANC type label so that we can distinguish this bin from all the others. And please join me in welcoming the newest addition to my wormery, the African nightcrawlers from Northeast Worms. So that was fun. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thank you, Gaetano, for the awesome little care package you sent here. I look forward to seeing this population grow as the little baby worms start to grow and mature, and even as the cocoons that you said are in here start to hatch and increase the size of the population. So that should be fun. But that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.